How many have heard of a place called Death Valley? Anybody heard of Death Valley before? I'm not talking about this Death Valley. It's football season almost, and we're not going to talk about this Death Valley, but I'm talking about this Death Valley. I'm talking about the Death Valley that is in California, Death Valley National Park. If you're not familiar with that, it is the driest area in North America. It receives less than 2 inches of rain every single year. It has been recorded. The hottest temperature ever on earth has been recorded at Death Valley. It was 134 degrees. Can you imagine? It's like 2 degrees more than what it is outside right now. But it's the driest area. It's oftentimes looks like the deadest area. And the reason why it received the name Death Valley is because nothing grows there. Nothing grows there. And I don't know about you and your kind of journey, your faith journey, but sometimes in my life, sometimes it feels kind of like this. Sometimes my life feels, sometimes it looks a little bit like this. Sometimes my relationship with God feels a little dry. Sometimes my relationship with the ones that I care about the most can look fractured oftentimes like this. Sometimes in life, our dreams can kind of feel a little bit dead. Sometimes in life just doesn't have much life to it. Well, if that's you today, I've got some good news, and the good news is that your present condition doesn't have to be your future reality. That just like in Death Valley and the experience that it has with the dryness and the deadness and all of that, something happened in 2004 in Death Valley that kind of changed everything. In 2004, they received over 7 inches of rain in a very short period of time. And when that happened, a phenomenon happened. Turn to somebody next to you, say that word 3 times. Phenomenon, phenomenon, phenomenon. A phenomenon happened that really stumped meteorologists all over the world. You see, nothing happened right away after the rain, but it was in the next season that they experienced what's called a super bloom. It was a moment where what was and looked dead and dying and dry and fractured became a beautiful carpet of flowers. And here's what they learned about Death Valley, that Death Valley wasn't really dead, it was dormant. That in Death Valley, what was dry and cracked and seemingly dead, that under the surface there were seeds, that those seeds needed the right conditions, and when they received the right conditions, they came alive. And I want to tell you this morning that the same can be true in your life. That today what might feel dead is just dormant. That God has planted seeds under the surface in your life that are waiting for the right conditions to come alive. And today I want to take a little bit of time and I want to show you how this happens in our life. Hey, if today's your first time with us, I want to say welcome home again. My name is Ryan, and together with my wife, Andrea, we have the honor of serving here as lead pastor. And you've picked a great week to join us because we're kicking off a brand new series today that's called Finish Strong. And over the next 4 weeks, we're going to highlight really 4 different things that if we could apply, if we could get these things right in our life, that it's gonna help us to be able to finish strong. I don't know what you know about journeys and races, but here's what I know. It's not as much how you start the race that matters as how you finish it. And we wanna be a people that finishes the race strong. And so today, if you got your Bibles, pull those out. If you got your smartphone, You can grab that. Turn with me to Psalm chapter 92. Psalm chapter 92, and today I want to talk to you about the importance of the right place. The importance of the right place. Turn to two people, say, get in the right place. Come on, get in the right place. So the book of Psalms is kind of somewhat in the middle of the Bible, and I don't know if you know this about the book of Psalms, but it is a collection of songs. It's a collection of songs, 150 to be exact, that were written over a 1,000-year period of time by various different worship leaders of those days. And it was songs that were written from a heart of gratitude, a heart that wanted to praise God. That these were worship leaders, these were people that didn't have a perfect life. Their life wasn't easy. They experienced mountaintops and valleys just like you and I do. But what they recognized in life is that despite the difficulty, despite the things that they had walked through and experienced, they experienced God's faithfulness. And this is a collection of songs that expresses that kind of gratitude of God's faithfulness in their life. And one of the things about Psalm 92 that is so interesting is that this is David that's writing this psalm, and this chapter is kind of a compare and contrast between the lives of those that are really leaned in and pursuing God versus the lives of those that aren't so much. And there's a part in this psalm kind of in the middle of the chapter where David talks about the blessing that is attached to people who make the decision to plant themselves in the right place, to plant themselves in the house of God. And so today I want to take a few minutes. I want us to read Psalm 92, 12 through 14, and then I want to come back to these three verses, and I want to unpack them a little bit because if you're anything like me, I didn't grow up in an agricultural society the way that they did. And so sometimes we kind of miss the message of what's being communicated in the Bible because, well, we can't really relate to the method. And so I want to take just a little bit of time and unpack these three verses so that we can get a better idea of what David is really grateful for when it comes to his relationship with God. In Psalm chapter 92, starting in verse 12, it says that the righteous shall flourish like a palm tree, that they shall grow like a cedar in Lebanon, that those who are planted in the house of the Lord, that they are going to flourish in the courts of our God. In verse 14, it says that they shall still bear fruit in old age, and they shall be fresh and flourishing. Turn to somebody, say, let's get fresh and flourishing. Fresh and flourishing. Fresh and flourishing. In verse 12, David is kind of beginning to pen this, and this is what he writes. He uses this word flourishing. In verse 12, he says that the righteous shall flourish. This word flourish in the original language isn't just a word that kind of, you would read that and you would kind of think he's talking about blessing. He's talking about kind of thriving in life. And yes, that's part of it. But this word in the original language actually means to break forth like a flower. If you've ever seen a flower that has been fast forwarded in, really fast time as it grows, it just has this, it kind of grows, it becomes a bulb, and then it just kind of like explodes open. It breaks open. And David is talking about being planted in the house of God and flourishing in our life, that it is essentially like experiencing breakthrough in our life. And he associates this breakthrough to two trees. The first one is a palm tree. I got a picture up here in case you don't know what a palm tree is. But as he's writing this, and he's beginning to compare this to these two trees, I'd have to think that as he's familiar with palm trees in his area, he recognizes a couple things. One is that a palm tree grows up and it grows out. That as he begins to look at the trunk of a palm tree and as the branches come out, it just becomes this visual of breakthrough. It's a visual of coming from not much into a lot. And he had to be associating the reality that surrounded in the area that he lived was desert, was dry area, was rocks. I mean, it was a harsh environment, and yet a palm tree like this could grow in the middle of a harsh environment. I think that the promise that David is writing about here for those that are planted in the right place is that when we are planted in the house of God, that we're going to experience a breakthrough in our life. We're going to experience the kind of breakthrough even when the odds are against them. Would anybody be okay walking away with a breakthrough in their marriage when it just seemed like the odds were against you? A breakthrough in your finances because even despite the odds being against you, or with your family or with your kids, David is saying here that when we make it a priority to plant ourselves in the house of God, that one of the promises that are attached with that is that we experience this kind of breakthrough in our life. He also compares it to a cedar in Lebanon. This is a cedar that would grow in those areas in those days. And the significance of a cedar in Lebanon is that it can grow up to 100 feet tall. The trunk can grow as wide as 40 feet, and it has this massive canopy that it has the ability to support. Something that's fascinating about this tree is its longevity, that the lifespan of a cedar of Lebanon is 1,000 years. And what's said about this tree is that the older it gets, the more resistant it becomes to disease and decay. And David is using this tree as a symbolism to help us to understand the kind of strength that wells up over time in our life when we are committed and planted in the house of the Lord. I would say that the second promise that David is writing about here is that when we are planted, that we end up developing the kind of faith in our life that can withstand the pressures of life. I don't know about you, but I experienced some pressures in life. And wouldn't it be nice to have the kind of faith that was anchored in such a way that no matter what comes against me, no matter what people are saying, no matter what the odds are, no matter what the environment is like, that I can have the kind of stability of faith that can withstand those seasons. Here's what he says in the next verse. He says, those who are, say that word, planted. Now I want you to notice here in this verse what he doesn't say. He doesn't say that those who are planted on the couch with their pajamas, with a bag of Lay's potato chips, are gonna flourish, right? He doesn't say, and I know I'm treading, but he doesn't say that those that are planted on the boat are gonna flourish. Even if you've named your boat House of God, so that you can tell people you're going out to the house of God today, you still aren't going to flourish. Have you heard the old joke about the pastor who had a boat that he called it visitation, so that whenever people would call the church, the receptionist could say, "Pastor's out on visitation today, he's unavailable." I don't have a boat, so you don't have to worry about me. And we got the best visitation pastor in the world with Pastor Donnie over here, so trust me, you don't want me visiting. But it doesn't say about being planted on the ball field. It doesn't say to be planted in all these other areas that you're going to flourish. David is writing here and he's singing this song, and he's saying that those who are planted in the house of the Lord, and that those that are planted in the house of the Lord, what's going to happen? They will flourish. It's that same original word, the word that means to break forth like a flower, that they will flourish in the courts of our God. You know, in this verse, in verse 13, something that kind of stood out to me. I was like one of the worst English and grammar students ever, but I do remember these things called conditional statements. And the Bible is full of conditional statements. A conditional statement means that you have to do the first thing in order to experience the second thing. And so oftentimes in our life, we want the second thing, but we don't want to do the first thing. And then we get confused about why is God's promises not happening in our life? And it's because the Bible is full of these conditional promises that essentially it is as you pursue God and surrender your life to Him, this becomes the blessing. We have a reward that is eternal, but we have a reward that is earthly. And it's promises that we experience in our life. And what David is saying here is that, listen, if you want to flourish in your life, the conditional statement is, well, then you need to be planted. And he says this in verse 14, he says, when you do that, that you are still going to bear fruit in old age. Now, I love the way that he phrases this. He kind of sneaks this word still in there. And in my Bible, that word is underlined because essentially what he's saying is that when we plant ourselves in the house of God, we're going to experience this kind of breakthrough, kind of flourishing, thriving life that is going to produce fruit in our life. But the fact that he puts the word still means that it is a continuation. Like he is in his mind, he's doing this fast forward to the end of life, and he's saying, even in the end, the final years of my life, if I am planted in the house of God, my life is going to flourish and thrive in such a way that I am making a difference in the lives of others, even in the latter part of my life. And that's the promise that he kind of sets up in promise number 3, that when we live this kind of way, that we can make a difference. Like my life is no longer just about me and getting the things that I want and my dreams and all those elements, but now all of a sudden, the way that I live my life, that it's making a difference in the lives of others. That it's not just throwing a rock in a pond and it just dropping in there, but my life is gonna leave ripple marks. And those ripple marks are gonna be passed down to my kids, and they're gonna be passed down to my grandkids and my great grandkids, and they're gonna be passed down to my coworkers and the people that I come into contact with at the grocery store or when I pay my bills. He's talking about leaving a legacy. That we become the kind of people that does that, not just in the now, but we become the kind of people that do that throughout our lives. And then I love this part in verse 14. He's like, those people that are planted in the house, those people that are experiencing breakthrough, those people that are thriving, those people that are making a difference in the lives of others, that they are going to be fresh and flourishing. I think what he's getting at here is a fourth promise, that when we are planted in the right place, when we're planted in the house of God, that we're gonna experience a vibrant relationship with God, not a Death Valley relationship, but a super bloom relationship with God that positions us in such a way to carry out his purposes for our life. You see, our lives are a lot like a plant. You see, in order for us to be able to grow, in order for us to be useful, that we have to be planted. And the mistake that oftentimes we make in our life is we confuse being planted with being positioned. There's a difference between being positioned in the house of God and being planted in the house of God. That being positioned essentially means that we are sitting here in the house of God, and when we are positioned and just kind of be mindful, I'm about to kind of tread again, so just put your seatbelt on, hold on, but it'll be all right. It'll be all right. It'll be all right. But when we're positioned in the house of God, it's kind of like we do church a little bit, kind of off and on, right? Like maybe it's big weekends, maybe it's Easter and Christmas, maybe it's once a month, every 5 weeks, 6 weeks. It's being positioned in the house of God is really all about convenience and priorities. That we have a lot of things in our life, and so church is kind of just one of those things. And so when we have a lot of other things going on in our life, that we tend to say yes to those things and no to the church. Like I think a question that the Lord prompted on me years ago is like when's the last time you said no to those things and yes to church? Right? We're really good at saying yes to those things and no to church, but when was the last time you said no to those things and yes to church? See, being positioned is this convenient? Do I feel like it today? Do I have a lot of chores, a lot of things that I got to get done, so I'm gonna kind of skip out on our church today so that I can get my stuff done this week. And I'm not trying to put guilt on you at all. I'm trying to help paint a picture like what David is with what flourishing looks like. At the end of the day, it's all of our choices of whether or not we want to flourish or not. But that's being positioned. Being positioned is kind of sneaking in and sneaking out on Sundays. Being positioned is like coming from time to time, but not really building relationships. Like the relationships that we might build, the few of them are surface level relationships. Oftentimes that happens because we've experienced trauma and pain in relationships in the past. And Satan's really good at putting those things in our pathway from early childhood. As somebody that is a product of a divorce home, Satan is really good at putting those kind of fractured relationships and unmet expectations in our journey early in life, so that the older we get, when God begins to draw us towards his kingdom and his presence, those experiences begin to pop up in our mind, and they become walls that keep us from leaning into the very things that we need in order to thrive in our life. And so as a result, we become positioned instead of planted. Positioned is kind of spectating what God is doing rather than participating in what God is doing. Like positioned is making the choice that like listen, I know it's not guilt, I'm just bringing awareness. But positioned is us attending church from time to time, but never really saying, God, I know you've given me a gift. How can I use that gift to make a difference in the lives of others? And that's what positioned looks like. And here's the problem with being positioned in the house of God instead of being planted in the house of God is that we miss out on the nutrients and we miss out on the stability in our life for us to be able to grow the way that God wants us to grow. You see, when we're positioned and all hell starts coming against, I almost hit myself in the face with that plant. When we're positioned and life just starts rattling us from the outside in, right? Our life starts looking like this, and we begin to question and doubt God. We begin to wonder if God's really who he says he is. And we begin to think things like, if God was really who he says he is, then he would fix my marriage. He would take away this addiction to pornography. He would fix these issues with my finances or with my relationships. But the reason why we experience these unmet expectations is because it's part of a conditional statement, and we're not doing the part that we're supposed to do to be planted. We're just positioned, but yet expecting the blessing that comes with being planted. You see, the danger of this and the things that we think in our mind is I'm not growing spiritually, or that church doesn't feed me, or whatever the long list is. And what David is trying to communicate in Psalms 92 is that the promises that God has for your life, like if you're gonna be able to finish strong in life and your life flourish and experience breakthrough, then you can't be positioned in the house of God. You've got to be planted in the house of God. But here's why we struggle to be planted in the house of God. Is I, in college, worked for a landscaping company, and one of the things that we had to do before, when we dug the holes in the ground and went to plant, is that oftentimes they would have us kind of break up the structure here just a little bit so that whenever we put it into the ground, it had a little bit of freedom to start expanding out. And oftentimes in our life, we don't want to experience that in our life, right? We want the position where we're staying within ourselves and life is the way that we want it. We don't want all the friction that causes our roots to begin to move outward, but that's part of being planted in the house of God. Being planted in the house of God means that we've got to put ourselves and surround ourselves in areas that allow us to be planted with soil around us. And there's pressing, there's kneading, there's a process that comes with that oftentimes is a little uncomfortable. And if you're anything like me, everything inside of you wants to avoid uncomfortable. You want God and comfortable at the same time. And David's trying to help us understand we can't have both. That with God comes uncomfortable. You know, when you think about being planted in the house of the God and all the elements involved, you've got the soil, but inside the soil, oftentimes, like one of the things that have to be added in order for this to be planted is this thing called fertilizer. How many of you know what fertilizer is? It's some crappy situations. And we don't want crappy situations. But maybe God uses crappy situations to help bring some nourishment in our lives so that we can grow and become the person that He has created us to be. Jesus never promised a perfect life. He used different words, but He promised some crappy situations. And it's this process of getting outside of ourselves and getting planted in the house and allowing the soil, the relationships, the people, some of the friction and the water in our life and the fertilizer. And God uses all of this as a way to help us to be able to have the nutrients that we need to grow and the stability that we need to be able to continue to grow beyond the painful seasons. And friend, I don't know where you are in your journey with God, and I know in this room we've got some that you are planted. And we've got some that were planted at some point, and now you're positioned, and some that are positioned, and some that aren't even positioned. And it doesn't really matter where you are on that journey, the truth still remains that those who are planted in the house of God will flourish. And friend, when we live that way, when we live the planted life, we begin to experience these 4 promises that God speaks of and that David writes about in this psalm. And I can just picture this moment thousands of years ago, and I can remember this moment, and I can't remember it, but I can picture the moment. David is penning these words, and I can hear the strings of the harp as he has this heart of gratitude, where he says in the very next verse that with pleasure they still proclaim that God, you are so good, that you're my beautiful strength, that you've never made a mistake with me.